This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The UN warns that hardliners put South Sudan at risk of a full-scale war. South African envoy apologizes over attacks on Nigerian nationals. And we take a closer look at the Alexandria Library, one of the hallmarks of Egypt's coastal city. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. As always, great to have you with us. I am Richard Nta, live in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us from across the continent and around the globe, we thank you for joining us. And tonight, I'm alongside my colleague, Raman Yang, who has our business headlines. Raman.
That's right, Richard. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. Oil has shed some of its massive price gains, but the threat of military action is still keeping uncertainty around the market. And we look at how the power grids of Eastern and Southern African countries are to be interconnected. The business of trading electricity will also be in focus later in the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Richard.
Thank you so much, Rama. Welcome to Africa Live once again. We begin in South Sudan, where the chairperson on the UN Commission on Human Rights in South Sudan, Yasmin Suka, has welcomed a recent meeting between President Kiir and Riek Machar that is set to establish the unity government. However, Suka flagged the influence of existing hardliners unwilling to compromise on key issues such as the number of states, boundaries, and security arrangements. The UN warned that this risks plunging the young nation back into full-scale conflict. Starvation of the civilians and the displacement of nearly 4 million people since the civil war began in 2013 are among the urgent humanitarian issues the UN calls leaders to respond to. One of the steps the UN expert proposed for consideration was the creation of a reparations and compensation fund that allocated 1% of Sudan's annual oil revenues to aid the people. All right, to give us a better sense of understanding about all this, our very own CGTN's Patrick Ayette is in Juba and has been keeping a close eye on this one. Patrick, thank you for joining us here on Africa Live. There are reports indicating that hardliners are putting South Sudan at risk of a full-scale war. What more can you tell us, Patrick?
Yes, Richard, you know, in every country there are always hardliners, and South Sudan is not an exception. But despite the fact that there are hardliners, we have seen that there are so many things that have been done and they are positive for the peace process in South Sudan. For example, this peace agreement has presented the best opportunity ever since war started in 2013. Now the IGAD is reporting that, of course, 500,000 South Sudanese people have returned home who were actually living as refugees in the neighboring countries. Roads have opened. We have also seen the opposition leader coming to Juba last week. Some members of his family are here in South Sudan. And of course, representatives of all opposition group signatories to the agreement are also here in South Sudan. Now, what this tells us is that there are positive things that have actually taken place since the agreement.
Well, we apologize for that break in communication. That's Patrick Ayette. Hopefully, we'll get a hold of him a little later on the show and find out more on this story from South Sudan. Moving on, though. At least 2 people have drowned after a boat sank off the coast of Tunisia. According to a Coast Guard official, 9 people have been rescued and 14 others are still missing. The boat sank 10 kilometers from the coastline near the city of Sfax. Reports indicate that all the migrants traveling on the boat were Tunisians. Rescue operations for the tragedy are still ongoing, and there have been 2 migrant shipping disasters off the Tunisian coast this year. In July, 86 African migrants drowned after the boat capsized on the Libyan coast. Another boat taking migrants to Europe from Libya capsized in June, drowning at least 65 people. All right, let's get back to our earlier story. Patrick, great to have you back. The question is why? Why are there elements in South Sudan that do not, I repeat, do not want to see peace in this country? Can you explain that to us, Patrick?
Yes, you know, when you are in a war situation, definitely there are people who benefit because of war. One of the groups of people who benefit because of war are people who are, for example, in the government. They may feel that if a peace agreement is implemented, then they may lose their positions in order to give some positions to some opposition groups coming to be accommodated in the government. But this is not actually something which is very serious, because we have seen a lot of positive things happening in South Sudan. As I was stating before, that we have seen opposition leader coming to Juba. We have seen refugees returning home. We have seen the guns going silent. So there is a lot of hope that you know, the peace deal will be implemented. And as I said earlier, the current peace deal implementation is the best. It has presented the best situation we have ever seen since war began in 2013. But of course, there are people who might be benefiting because of the war, and they would want to see that those opposition groups who are outside the government do not return. Yeah, there is that possibility.
All right, Patrick, let's touch more on this. Let's talk about those who don't want to see peace in South Sudan. How can IGAD, the African Union, and the international community deal with such elements and, of course, bring peace to South Sudan?
Yeah, there are things that they need to do. For example, we have seen now that the IGAD special envoy comes to South Sudan almost on a weekly basis. And when he comes, he tries to meet the parties. He tries to move also outside Juba to go to other states. We have seen the ceasefire monitoring team also moving to different parts of the country, trying to preach peace. So that is why we have seen the ceasefire holding. Now, what more do they need to do? I think there is need for them to speak in one voice. We have seen before that some countries within the East African region were supporting either opposition or supporting government. If this kind of support continues, then peace will be something of a dream in South Sudan. But we have seen changes in the region. We have seen a change in Sudan. We have also seen change in Ethiopia. And we hope that perhaps there will be no support for, you know, different groupings within South Sudan. And if the region speaks with one voice, if African Union speaks with one voice, then definitely we are going to see peace in South Sudan.
All right, Patrick Ayette, thank you for breaking it down for us. That's our very own CGTN correspondent Patrick Ayette speaking to us from Juba. To Tunisia now, where presidential candidates Kais Saied and Nabil Karoui have won the first round of the early presidential elections in the country. If urgent challenges are filed only at first instance, the election authority IC will be able to hold the presidential runoff election in October. CGTN's Adnan Shawaushi has more on that story.
Kais Saied is leading the first round of the early presidential election with 18.4%, followed by Nabil Karoui with 15.6% of the votes.
Following the end of the first round of the early presidential election, within the legal period, the counting led to the following result. Because none of the candidates got more than 50%, the two candidates with the highest voting will take part in the second round.
Experts assert that the presidential election took part against the backdrop of a serious social and economic crisis in an atmosphere of rejection of the political elites.
This vote is a message to the ruling parties and the opposition. Tunisians are fed up and have voted for two outsiders because they're looking for change.
Many Tunisian and foreign observation missions noted that violations recorded during the election silence period and on election day were minor and could not influence the election results. They described the early presidential election as free, fair and transparent.
Our 3,000 observers have confirmed the data and results of the election authority. We did not record any important violations. The whole election process from the campaign to the vote counting was smooth and independent.
EZ members said that the election authority is able to hold the second round of the presidential election on the same day as the legislative polls, scheduled for October 6th. According to the board of the Independent Higher Authority for Elections, EZ operates in a climate of independence and is under no pressure from the government, the ruling parties or the opposition.
The election authority adds that preliminary results show that two anti-system candidates, Nabil Al-Qarwi and Qais Said, are leading, and this reflects the independence of the authority. Abdel Shabashi, CGTN, Tunis.
Let's head to Abuja now, where we hear South Africa has apologized to Nigeria for the xenophobic attacks which targeted Nigerians and other African nationals living in that country. South Africa's special envoy to Nigeria, Jeff Radebe, apologized on behalf of President Cyril Ramaphosa for what he called acts of criminality and violence that recently occurred in South Africa. He also clarified that no Nigerian was killed as a result of the violence. The visit comes as more Nigerians are set to leave South Africa later today because of the xenophobic attacks.
Mr. Jeff Radebe and his delegation came calling at the presidential villa in Abuja to basically say one thing: sorry. He handed that official apology to President Buhari in front of the cameras. It's the first time since the latest round of xenophobic violence targeting Nigerians and other African nationals living in South Africa that President Cyril Ramaphosa would be sending a special delegation to convey his apology to his Nigerian counterpart.
We met a short while ago with His Excellency President Buhari, the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, to convey our President Ramaphosa's sincerest apologies about the incidents that have recently transpired in South Africa. Those incidents do not represent what we stand for as a constitutional democracy in South Africa, and the President has apologized for these incidents. And he has also instructed law enforcement agencies to leave no stone unturned, that all those involved must be brought to book so that the rule of law must prevail in South Africa.
Nigeria had asked for compensation for Nigerians who were attacked in the xenophobic violence. On that issue, this is what Mr. Radebe had to say.
There is a binational commission between South Africa and Nigeria, and on the 3rd of October, during President Buhari's state visit to South Africa, there'll be detailed discussions that are going to be held there. I do understand that this issue of compensation restitution is part of the agenda items in the draft that the Nigerian government has presented to South Africa. So I think let's wait until the 3rd of October to see how that unfolds. But I can indicate as a lawyer that the South African law requires that all registered companies must have public insurance in terms of things of this nature.
The issue of compensation is quite popular in Nigeria and will no doubt be a sticking point when the president of both countries meet face-to-face in the coming weeks. Despite this visit, Nigeria is still pressing on with the evacuation of its nationals who are willing to return home from South Africa. Authorities say around 320 are scheduled to leave South Africa later today. 187 had returned last Wednesday. In all, the Nigerian High Commission in South Africa says at least 1,000 Nigerians have registered to leave the country over the xenophobic violence. And for as long as this mass exodus continues, the peace moves initiated by the South African government will continue to be challenged. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, Nigeria and South Africa's relations date way back to the 1960s during the apartheid era. Nigeria reportedly contributed millions of dollars as relief funds for victims and to help fight against apartheid in South Africa until its liberation in 1994. Perhaps it is this historical reason that makes the Nigerian anger especially strong. Let's take a listen.
Ties between South Africa and Nigeria have not been at best in recent days following xenophobic attacks that continue to dominate headlines on the continent. For Nigerians, it is a feeling of betrayal from a sister nation whose liberation from the racist apartheid regime their country contributed to.
They feel very angered because Nigerians feel betrayed, and the Nigerian government had a mutual relationship with South Africa, especially during the apartheid era. And then most of the things, the Nigerian people and the Nigerian government feel that the efforts they put in liberating Africa from South Africa, from the apartheid rule is not being reciprocated, and this is not the way they should be paid back.
It is not the first time that Nigerians have been targeted in sporadic waves of xenophobic violence. It started in 2008. Since then, scores of businesses owned by foreigners, including Nigerians, have been destroyed, leaving broken livelihoods in their wake. However, the latest wave of attacks that began on the 2nd of September proved to be the last straw that threatened to break the cord that united the two nations. As the Nigerian government escalated diplomatic pressure on South Africa, angry youth descended on South African businesses and installations in Nigeria.
This is not the first time these kind of issues have been happening. We've had reports in the past decades where such issues happen, and then the South African government turned a blind eye to it. Sometimes it looked like they are incapacitated, or maybe because of political exigencies, they didn't want to take decisive actions. So this thing has been happening over and over again, and then I think the Nigerian people are reacting now because they think it is one gone too many.
Nigerian President Muhammadu Buhari ordered the evacuation of Nigerians from South Africa as the government demanded compensation from South Africa. Nigeria also snubbed the World Economic Forum that was taking place in Cape Town.
The consequences of things as it is going to bring mutual distrust between the both countries. That is one. The trade between both countries is going to be affected definitely. These two countries are the two largest economies in Africa. So the implication of whatever happens in one country affects the totality of the African continent. And this is something we cannot afford to have at the moment. Thank you.
As South Africa moves to mend fences, part of the over 600 Nigerians who had registered to be moved back home have already been repatriated. Brian Toussaint, CGTN.
Zimbabwe's Vice President Kimbo Mohadi is in South Sudan for a two-day visit. South Sudan's government says it aims to strengthen ties with Zimbabwe in the fields of agriculture, education, and mining. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
South Sudan's government says it needs the support of Zimbabwe as it tries to implement a peace deal it signed with opposition groups last year. Zimbabwe's vice president arrived in Juba on Monday for a trip which includes talks with South Sudan's president and the Speaker of Parliament. A unity government is due to be formed in South Sudan in November this year. The current institution tasked with setting up what's needed to form a government is known as the National Pre-Transitional Committee. It is made up of representatives of all parties signatory to the agreement and is on the agenda for Vice President Mohadi.
You will also be meeting with the National Pre-Transitional Committee so that you get an update on the current status of the peace agreement, the implementation of the revitalized peace agreement.
Zimbabwe has been offering scholarships to a number of South Sudanese students. Zimbabwe is also experienced in agriculture and mining sectors in which Juba says it can expand its expertise by improving ties with Harare. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, keep it right here on CGTN. We've got a lot more news coming your way, including President George Weah of Liberia appeals for help to set up local war crimes court. And Africa looks to benefit as oil prices soar after Saudi oil refinery attack.
In 70 years, China has undergone unprecedented transformation. From its old industrial base in the northeast to its new manufacturing powerhouse in the southeast and to its emerging southwest. CGTN offers you a panoramic view of contemporary China. Our crews will travel along 3 different routes and come to you live from dozens of locations and 3 mobile studios. Join us for an all-inclusive look at China on our TV channel and digital platforms, September the 9th to the 20th. It is New China, then and now, in celebration of the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic of China, only on CGTN.
I've covered the China story for more than 30 years.
I'm amazed by what they have done here.
And over the years, I've witnessed China change, at times in leaps and bounds, in very dramatic ways. And sometimes in a more gradual way. Change may be glacial, but here it seems to be constantly happening. I'm Jaime Flor Cruz. Join me as I revisit and rediscover an ever-changing China.
Welcome back. Liberia's President George Weah has invited the president of the International Criminal Court to the country to discuss the idea of setting up a war and economic crimes court. The tribunal is intended to address crimes committed during 2 bouts of brutal fighting in 1989 to 1996 and 1999 to 2003, in which some 250,000 people were killed. Thousands more were mutilated and raped, often by armies of drugged child soldiers led by ruthless warlords. Liberia's Deputy Presidential Press Secretary Smith Toby said that President Weah had recently met ICC President Chile Eboe Osuji in Nigeria to briefly discuss the matter and are awaiting a response. However, the president has been accused of stalling by seeking advice instead of presenting a bill to set up a court. As unfortunate as the attacks on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities might be, for some oil-producing countries, it's an opportunity to ramp up production and take advantage of the current global spike in the price of oil. It's especially so for oil producers here in Africa, whose national budgets have been threatened by low oil prices. Here is CGTN's Deji Badmus with more on that story.
Virtually all African oil producers will be following very keenly developments in Saudi Arabia over the attack on that country's oil facilities. From Nigeria to Angola, the Republic of Congo to Equatorial Guinea, Gabon to South Sudan, and other smaller oil-producing countries in Africa, the Saudi attack is a big deal, an opportunity to rake in more revenue from the sale of crude as prices go up. One country where the situation could make a huge difference is Nigeria, where oil accounts for a very significant part of government revenue. Prices had trended below the country's budget benchmark of $60 per barrel just before the Saudi attack. But that has now changed following the incident, with prices surging, prompting talks of a possible upward adjustment in the budget benchmark.
For now, it's a one-off event. So we will be monitoring the situation. If it becomes sustainable, then there might be need to adjust. But for now, we'll maintain the benchmark rates that we have established in the budgets and the budget proposal for 2020.
If Saudi Arabia, that has very sophisticated security systems, is affected in this manner, it means we are also vulnerable. So let us not be in a hurry to celebrate. And like the Minister of State said, we should also not be in a hurry to adjust our revenues.
It remains to be seen how far oil prices could go in the current surge. On Monday, prices closed 15% higher on a record trading day, with the Brent crude surging more than $11 per barrel at one point. With the potential of a likely U.S.-Iran conflict arising from this attack, some analysts expect prices to continue to go up in the short to medium term. It's now up to the African oil producers like Nigeria to take advantage and make the best out of the prevailing situation in the global oil market. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
And Mozambican President Filipe Nyusi has suggested the possibility of talks with Islamist insurgents in the northern province of Cabo Delgado, but not if they remain faceless. The militants, known locally as Al-Shabaab, though not linked to the Somali militant group above the same name, have killed 200 people and destroyed 600 homes in the area since 2017. Here is CGTN's Angelo Coppola with more on that story.
The Mozambican president made the call on Monday in Churo district, which is in the Cabo Delgado province. There's been no response as yet to the president's call. But less than 24 hours later, in fact, we have had an attack by Renamo dissidents, apparently. That was a confirmed attack, and that happened early Tuesday morning. Security analyst Jasmine Opperman tells me that the Renamo dissidents aren't in the mood to give up anytime soon, or to compromise, in fact. Meanwhile, the new Renamo leader, on the other hand, is trying to entice his members to adhere to the ceasefire agreement and hand in their weapons in exchange for some socio-economic benefits. We're not sure what those benefits are just yet, but we're waiting for those to come through. On the attacks in the Cabo Delgado province itself, Opperman says that the insurgents will never show their faces, which doesn't help the president's call either. It now appears that the government can't actually contain the violence that's happening in that province, and have called in the help from Russia in the form of private contractors. Meanwhile, according to Opperman, it's also understood that the Islamic State is trying to seize this opportunity to gain a foothold in the province and also in the country. And the longer that remains unresolved, Opperman says, the greater the risk that extremism is going to gain the upper hand. An analyst at Zaitama News, in the meantime, Alex Nta, tells me that there are two schools of thought on why the president actually reached out to the insurgents in Cabo Delgado. One, the president is giving up on trying to beat the insurgents, as they have become a lot stronger, in fact too strong for the government forces, and they're far more organized. And secondly, he might well be trying to calm down voters in the province and generally in the country, while at the same time pursuing that military option and trying to control and dominate them. So we're less than a month away to elections in Mozambique, so it's getting to that critical stage right now. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
And to Kenya now, where grade 3 students have begun a month-long assessment exercise based on a new education curriculum, the competency-based curriculum, which seeks to replace the old 844 system that has been in place for the past 32 years. The government says the new system will focus more on the child's abilities and less on exams, as it seeks to prepare students for an ever-changing dynamic jobs market. CGTN's Robert Nagila has more.
At this public primary school in Nairobi, these grade 3 students are sitting for their first ever national assessment tests under the hawk-eyed supervision of their teacher. She is clear it is not an exam but an assessment of the child's abilities.
Can the child communicate? And how can the child communicate? Can the child be able to work with others? Can the child be imaginative? How can the child behave towards a certain situation?
The assessment is based on a new education system, the competency-based curriculum, which will see children attend 2 years of pre-primary, 6 years of primary school, 6 years of secondary school, and 3 years in an institution of higher learning. The new system is based on identifying foundation skills which can be nurtured. It replaces what was known as the 844 system, where children attended primary school for 8 years, spent 4 years in secondary school, and another 4 years in university.
The old curriculum, which is 844, is exam-oriented, while the new curriculum, which is the CBC, is child-oriented.
There has been some confusion over the grade 3 assessment, with many questioning the wisdom of putting grade 3 students through national exams. The government, however, says no individual results will be provided, neither will there be report cards or ranking of schools, as is the case in national exams.
The core competencies that we are infusing in the learning areas, that is what we want to see. How this child has progressed. Is the child still the same from the time joined the school, or has changed?
The idea being to monitor the quality of education, gather information on learning achievements, and provide support for teachers and inform education policy and planning. On this, the first day of the assessment, the third graders tackled a mathematics activity assessment meant to gauge them on problem solving, creativity, and digital literacy skills using numbers, measurements, and geometry. The pupils will also be tested on English language activities and integrated learning areas, with the entire exercise expected to last until the end of September. At the end of the exercise, data from all primary schools will be collated and a comprehensive report on the competency-based curriculum prepared for the government on its successes and failures. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
Alexandria Library is one of the hallmarks of Egypt's coastal city. It was built around 285 BC and houses over 2 million books. In 2002, a second modern library was constructed close to the location of the old library. CGTN's Yasser Hakim toured the Library of Alexandria and filed this report.
Built over 80,000 square meters and 11 floors, the Library of Alexandria is an icon of science and research in the North African country. Alexandria was known as the capital of knowledge and learning because of the Library of Alexandria, which was established in the years 285 to 246 BC. It was the largest and most significant of its kind in the ancient world. And the new library, built in 2002, aims at resuming that role.
What we aspire to have is the same cultural influence of the ancient library. The library is not similar in design, but we are trying to create the same cultural, historical and scientific effect the old library had on the world during the Ptolemaic era.
Apart from over 2 million books, there are numerous sections in the library. There are 3 museums. One is a gallery depicting the history of Alexandria. The second is about ancient Egypt. It includes pharaonic mummies and several artifacts from the Neo-Roman era, discovered underground while constructing the library. There's also a manuscripts museum.
We have here 6,000 manuscripts. We display from them 120 manuscripts here. We have here different sections also, Egyptology section, Judaism, Christianity, and a collection of Islamic manuscripts. From the masterpieces we have here, we have the oldest manuscript. It's about interpretation of the Quran by scientist Al-Busti, dates back to 978, more than 1,000 years. And this manuscript is very important because it shows to us one of the early stages of adding dots on the Arabic letters, which we needed for non-Arabs. So they wouldn't mix between the pronunciation of the Arabic letters.
There is a special division for the visually impaired and ones with special needs. An important addition is the Francophone section.
The French National Library gifted Alexandria Library 500,000 books. It's considered the largest gift from one library to another. With this gift and our own collection, we became the 4th largest library in the world for Francophone books outside of France. Our main 3 languages are Arabic, English, and French.
The library attracts researchers and visitors as well.
We receive about 700,000 people every year. 150,000 of them are visitors who tour the library. The rest are students or researchers.
I love books. I come here to read a lot. I like reading biographies.
I am interested in life coaching and education. I feel it's important and I come here to research about it.
The library is growing by the year. It has the capacity to hold double the amount of books and exhibition halls. The aim is to continue as the beacon of knowledge in the North African country. Yes, Hakim, CGTN, Alexandria.
Well, you could have been anywhere else in the world, but you chose to be right here with us on Africa Live, and we appreciate that. It's time for our business headlines now with Raman Yan.
Thank you very much, Richard. Here's what's coming up in business. Oil prices have given up some of their gains, but the threat of military action is still stalking the markets. And the power grids of Eastern and Southern African countries will be interconnected. We're looking at the business of trading electricity next.
Again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Oil prices have shed some of the massive gains they recorded on Monday. Not much though, especially as the United States flagged the possible release of crude reserves. But still, the threat of military action over the attacks on Saudi oil facilities is keeping prices relatively elevated, and stocks are still under a bit of pressure. Brent crude prices are down 1.78% to about $67.79 a barrel, and that's despite a close to 20% rise on Monday at one point that marked its biggest one-day percentage gain since 1988. Shaky investor confidence has also continued to support safe haven assets like gold, for instance. Now, the rate cut from the US Federal Reserve, or at least the forecast rate cut, and of course talks on trade between China and the United States scheduled for Thursday, are also forecast to determine the near-term direction of crude oil prices. The United States and Saudi Arabia have both accused Iran of orchestrating the strikes in Saudi oil fields over the weekend, but the government in Iran has denied any responsibility. These attacks have caused the biggest surge in crude oil prices since the Gulf War in 1991. CGTN's White House correspondent Nathan King filed this report.
Whoever carried out this attack, it was on a scale not seen in recent memory. Nearly 6 million barrels of oil a day suddenly cut from global supply. That's nearly half of Saudi Arabia's daily output. US satellite images show around 19 points of impact, drones and missiles used with a degree of accuracy that, according to Washington, indicates Tehran is the likely culprit.
Well, it's looking that way. We'll have some pretty good, we're having some very strong studies done, but it's certainly looking that way at this moment, and we'll let you know. As soon as we find out definitively, we'll let you know.
Trump says he doesn't want war with Iran, but added that the US military has superiority over Tehran. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, is dismissing claims of responsibility from the Houthi rebels. The Riyadh has been fighting for over 4 years in Yemen.
The weapons used in the terrorist attack, whether it be in Abqaiq or Kurais, initial evidence shows that these are Iranian weapons. We're investigating this and will announce the findings. Initial findings show that the terrorist attack did not originate from Yemeni territories as claimed by the Houthi militia.
Now, before these attacks over the weekend, there had been a lot of talk that perhaps US President Trump and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani would actually meet at the United Nations General Assembly in New York next week. That is now seen as highly unlikely.
We will never negotiate under sanctions again. If Trump considers talks necessary, he should take confidence-building measures and show respect to our nation.
Many analysts say hope for a reduction in tensions now depends on the Europeans, particularly a French initiative to try and keep Iran from further violating the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, the nuclear deal that the US has already dumped.
It's very important for all of Europe to save the nuclear deal with Iran, and also the Iranians seem to be determined to stay within the JCPOA if they get that kind of economic benefit.
War or words is the choice both Washington and Tehran face right now. If Washington provides evidence of Iran's involvement in these attacks, then the pressure to act will only increase. Iran, meanwhile, is rhetorically and perhaps in reality showing it too can ratchet up the pressure. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Power grids linking Eastern and Southern African countries are expected to be interconnected at least within the next 2 to 3 years. That comes in the wake of the completion of various high-voltage lines. Now, the connectivity essentially should pave the way for regional power trading and provide a higher pool of available energy resources. The Principal Secretary in the Energy Ministry in Kenya, Joseph Njoroge, told an East African Power Conference that high-voltage lines linking Ethiopia, Tanzania and Uganda to Kenya are expected to be ready within the next 3 years. The Kenya-Ethiopian link will be a 500 kilovolt line. The lines to Uganda and Tanzania will be 400 kilovolts respectively. Now, the power line to Uganda will thereafter link to Rwanda and Burundi, effectively creating an East African circuit. The power lines were expected to have been finished by 2017, but they were delayed due to difficulties with land acquisition. Now, speaking of Tanzania, tourism is an essential part of the East African country's economy, and its hotel industry is growing. A recent report from PricewaterhouseCoopers says revenue was up by over 15% last year, with growing number of visitors from key markets like India and China, especially in the wake of direct flights into the country. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
Exotic wildlife and palm-fringed beaches draw tourists to Tanzania. So many, the sector already earns 17.5% of the country's GDP. The government is keen to woo more travelers. It recently conducted tourism roadshows in the US, India and China, using Tanzania's embassies abroad to market the country as a holiday destination. It's also encouraging hoteliers to improve their service. Adam Foya is a designer who travels all over Africa to show his work. He says he has noticed a difference.
But now even there's a growth in the professionalism as well. Yes, we have the hospital, the warm people, the welcoming Tanzanian, which we are famous known for. But when you combine that with the hospital, with professional management, then you have something which, people travel from the rest of the world to come just and have experience.
Lucinda Norch manages Slipway Hotel, a popular tourist destination on Dar es Salaam's coast. She says there are many things that tourists look for in a good hotel.
A good hotel location is very important. The comfortable bed, nice amenities, luxury amenities in the hotel rooms, space, wireless internet, good reliable internet is very important. So those are all great views, of course. Those are all, and cleanliness and good service.
According to the Tanzanian Tourism Board, the number of tourists per year has doubled since 2010, reaching 1.5 million last year. It's expected that more hotel rooms, a strong economy, growth in tourism from India and China, and Tanzania's appeal as an exciting destination will contribute to growth over the next 5 years. But the sector still faces challenges. Hotel owners say bureaucratic obstacles and high taxes can make it hard to get a new business off the ground. AJ Badwara has been in the hotel business for 20 years, working all over the world. He says some Tanzanian officials demand bribes from hotel owners.
We are a running hotel, we are a running organization. Few things here and there will always be wrong and right. But just because of few things here and there wrong and right, you are punishing very big and you are harassing us. It demoralizes, and demotivates hotelier to do the business.
Experts say the tourist industry here still needs more investment to encourage more travelers from around the world to sample the Tanzanian sun. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Right then, in South Africa, municipalities around the country are trying to find ways to best dispose of rubbish, but enterprising artists may have one solution. Eve de Jong is the artist in focus for this story. She creates sculptures from used water bottles and other discarded items. As CGTN's Julie Shire now reports, her work is helping to save the planet by keeping these unwanted objects out of the environment.
Eve de Jong is a bricoleur artist. Her dislike for waste and fascination with bottle tops has led her to experimenting with discarded objects to create pieces of art, lamps and furniture.
I was drawn to the beautiful colours, which as an artist was my colour palette. You know, the blues and the reds and, you know, the beautiful metal colour tops. This is my medium. Like an artist has a paintbrush, I use plastic bottle tops to create beautiful objects.
There's a growing awareness among South Africans to recycle and reuse waste, but most rubbish still goes to landfill.
If people can see that waste is beautiful, then people can see that they will start respecting waste and separating it and discarding it in the right way, so that we don't have these landfill situation where they're dug under the ground.
De Jong is hoping her work will become a statement, especially for the fight against single-use plastics, which harms the environment and is a threat to life in the oceans.
Now I'm creating these wonderful big rocks, and I'm going to make it into a huge sculpture. And if you compare a beautiful plastic rocks to, you know, the garbage waste, which is like a huge mountain of waste, which becomes landfill. So one goes into the ground and the other one rises up and becomes a beautiful indoor sculpture.
Eve's work is all about the possibility of reinvention and second chances, and she hopes her pieces will inspire others to waste less and discover the beauty behind recycled art. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Right, and I'll leave it there for the time being. Quick update for you as far as oil prices are concerned. $65 a barrel at the moment, down by almost 5 percentage points. The Saudi oil minister is speaking at the moment. We'll keep a very close eye on developments here. What he says, especially about the ability to essentially ramp up production, repair the damage at their Abqaiq facility, and bring you up to date, of course, at 1800 GMT. For now, though, back to Richard.
Thank you so much, Rama. The news continues on Africa Live. We've got your sports news coming up after the break. Here's a look at that headline. South Africa's fastest woman, Karina Horn, suspended after testing positive